good to be here once again, recording these wonderful programs live on air right now. Actually, it's probably not going to be live when you see it, but it's live for us right now, and there's lots of life in it. Just to say hello to you all, hope that you're doing well. Thank you so much for the prayers. I know that you've been praying in terms of the visa and all the American stuff. So thank you so much for all that. And we do think that there's some headway being made. Please just carry on praying. We appreciate that very much. And thank you also for your generosity of heart. Thank you for gifts that you've sent, and love that you send us, and everything else. And we're so pleased that we're able to do this, especially for Kingdom House USA. It's a great blessing and honour for us here to do it. So just to let you know what's going on as well, I came back a little while ago from a trip to Norway. Of course, I was able to see my son Joshua, but as well as that, on the last day, I went to make some recordings with a very dear brother of mine called Tom Arnold Fjell. He has been an evangelist for many, many years and has evangelised probably over 37, 38 different countries in the world and seen many, many miracles. So he's a great brother. I've known him for many years. But he has started recording on the Gospel Channel, which actually its original source comes out of Iceland. That's where the big studios is, but they've made him a studio just 2 minutes away from his house. And now he makes his own recordings every week. And he invited me to be with him. So we did some recordings there, and I think we're going to start doing some recordings every 2 or 3 months over there as well. So that's going to be exciting, because that goes out to all of Europe, out to India and Asia, and also the whole of Scandinavia and all the northern countries. So I did 2 messages in Norwegian, which was a great challenge, but went very well. And I did 2 messages to Europe. And then one of the guys from Iceland, I believe it was the chief guy from Iceland, was actually down in Norway. And he was sat listening to me talking about the giving of yourself for another in love. And I was talking all about that, and he was sat there and he was actually crying. He was really, really moved with the message. And he came to me after I'd done the 4, and he said, would we please do an extra one to Iceland? And he was going to sit and translate this message into Icelandic, which was very interesting. I won't try and take it off, but it was very interesting. And we did 5 programs, which were wonderful, and I really enjoyed the time there. So it's amazing what's happened from these YouTube videos that Steve is doing, Steve Call Productions. It's amazing what's happening, and we see that it's just been more and more fruitful, and the sphere of this is increasing all the time. So thank you for your giving, for your prayers, and for being with us this evening. Now, obviously, we're looking at Acts chapter 7. We've been looking at the journey of life. I know that the last couple I've been talking about the pressing, or at least the last one, which was from Luke chapter 22. But I just want to do a little recap here on Moses. And we talked about Moses, and we said how he was mighty in words and deeds, and he really knew about the philosophy of life. He knew about the world. He knew about all the things of the world. He was 40 years old. He was second to Pharaoh at that time. And yet still in his heart was the DNA of God, the desire to serve God, the desire to see his own people come together in family, in community, to see his own people move in the purposes of God. He still had all that on the inside of him. And of course he got into a fight, and there was all sorts of things that happened. And really, what we said was this, that in terms of the world, he was very clever. But in terms of the spirit, he was dense. He really although he was called of God and he knew God, he didn't know God in a way that was personal, a way in which God had moved on the inside of him and began to change his character, began to change his mind, give him his own view of things. He didn't have that just yet. And of course, at 40 years old, so he'd learnt the worldly side of things, but he'd not learnt the kingdom side of things. And that is where God needed him to go. Because the heart was right, the desire was right, the dream was right, but the way in which he was going to outwork these purposes of God was wrong. And that's what we saw, that he actually killed a man. And, of course, he had to flee to another place. And this is what it says in verse 29 of Acts 7. It says, "Then, at this saying, Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons." And we said that Midian was the place of judgment. And of course, we don't mean judgment in terms of condemnation, and I'm going to talk about this later on, maybe this program, maybe the next. But we don't mean in terms of condemnation, because when people judge normally, they judge to condemnation. But when God judges, he judges to deliverance. In other words, he always brings life. So he looks at us, he judges what we're doing, and it's a righteous judgment. It's a just judgment. So he looks at us, and because he loves us so much, when he judges us, it's to life. It's getting us from A to B, from B to C. He's moving us along. He wants to progress us. So he doesn't look at us and judge us and go, "Oh, you terrible, terrible person. It's awful. You're never going to add up. You're never going to make anything. You're never going to do anything." He doesn't look at us in that way and condemn us. He always looks at us and goes, "Okay, this is how much I love you. This is how I see you. But I can see that the way that you're doing things, the way that you're thinking about things, the way that you process things, some of the attitudes and motivations of your heart need to be changed. They need to be transformed so that you can do it in a way that is the same way in which I would do it." You see, because many people have dreams and they have desires, which are God's dreams and desires, but if they're really going to bring him glory with it, they're going to have to do it in the way that he does it. They're going to have to think through it and purpose through it in the way that he does. So, of course, this is when we're talking about the kingdom coming to earth. And yes, God's blessing us continually, but the kingdom coming to earth is different to the blessings of God. I don't mean that we're not blessed with the kingdom. Of course, we are massively blessed when the kingdom comes to earth, but it takes us into a different dynamic. It takes us into a different dimension of life. It's not just a blessed dimension of life, but it's a fruitful dimension. It's a productive dimension. It's full of energy. It's full of life-changing, life-flowing momentum towards us. And that's how God wants us to be. He wants us to live in those kind of dimensions. And of course, Moses was a ruler and he was a judge, but he had to become a ruler and a judge that was issuing forth decrees from heaven, that was doing things in a way that heaven did things, not in a way that the world did things. So he found himself being a dweller in the land of judgment, and from that judgment, from the judgment of God, he began to listen to God, he began to learn the ways of the Spirit, and he began to do things in a kingdom way on the earth. And of course, this time was a difficult time for him. It was 40 years that he was being prepared. So it didn't happen in 3 years, it didn't happen in 4 years, it took him 40 years to come to a new place where he could outwork the purpose of God on the earth. And of course, Jesus, we know this, that Jesus spent 30 years getting prepared before he even began his ministry. So God, the Father, was speaking to him. He was fine-tuning Jesus all this time. All these 30 years, he was fine-tuning him. He was a man. He laid aside some of his attributes, and he was just a man like I am a man, like you're a man or a woman. He was human in every way. But as he began his ministry, he had to be doing his ministry in a kingdom way. So God had to prepare him for that. and God had to prepare Moses for that. I just want us to go to Luke 22 though, because this is where we were last time, and I remember us talking about it. I don't know how far I got on in it, but just to do it again, because it's really important in our life. It says there in Luke 22 and verse 39, it says, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives. So this is the place where all the olives were. And particularly on this mountain, there was a place called Gethsemane. And Gethsemane means the place of pressing. So he was on the Mount of Olives. So olives, of course, we get pure oil from olives. As olives are pressed, they bring forth pure olive oil. Jesus was on the Mount of Olives, but he was in a particular place, a sphere if you want, called Gethsemane, the place of pressing. And it says here that he was accustomed to going to this place. So this was a custom, this was something that had become something usual in his life. It was a custom, something that happened regularly. And it wasn't just a place of prayer. So Gethsemane was not just a place of prayer, but it was more than that. It was a place of pressing, a place that God really dealt with him internally. And he was accustomed to go there. His disciples were accustomed to go there. And I've got to say to you that on this journey, on this adventure of life, this journey of life, that all of us have to go to this place, not just the place of prayer, which is the place of intimacy with Jesus. So, of course, all these things are symbolic of something. So Gethsemane, the place of pressing, it's not just that the place itself was an important place, but it's more what went on in that place. And of course, many people pray, but we want our prayers to bring forth something. We want them to be prayers that change us, that transform our being as we're in dialogue with God, as we're in this intimate time with him. We want our prayers to be changing us internally. That's what prayer really does. As much as us praying about situations and about people, we actually see what we are like. We hear ourselves. We begin to get a viewpoint of ourselves that maybe we didn't see before. And God begins to deal with us personally in that place. And it's a place of pressing. And for Jesus, it was this place of pressing. And he was accustomed to it. And it says here that his disciples followed him. Well, of course, lots of disciples don't want to follow him at this place, because most of us don't want to go through any type of pressing. But of course, we need to be pressed to see what's really inside us, not to condemn us. So God never does anything to condemn us, but he allows pressing to come upon us. He allows us to see ourselves so that then we can cry out to him and he'll change us. If you don't see yourself, if you don't know yourself, if you don't know your mind, if you don't know the motivations of your heart, how possibly can he change you? Because he's not going to change you against your will. He's only going to change you according to what you want to happen in your life. He doesn't make anyone do anything in the sense of he's going to make you into another person without you wanting to be that other person, without you wanting to be the person that you really can become. He's not going to do it without your permission. So it says that his disciples also followed him into this place, and you were following Jesus into this place as well. There's not a way around. You can't get around it. You can't get over it. You've got to go through it. And it's all part of the journey of life, and it's a great part of it. But then he says, when he came to that place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And of course, there's lots of different temptations. There's the temptation to overeat. There's the temptation to be jealous. There's the temptation to self-pity. There's a temptation to lust. There's a temptation to all these different things. And we all are tempted in different ways. So I may be tempted in a different way to you. But there's a place that we come, and Jesus says, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Temptation is all around us. It's going to always be all around us. But Jesus is saying, pray that you don't enter into the temptation, because the temptation is going to cry out. You're going to see it. You're going to hear it. You're going to want it. That temptation's there all the time. But Jesus says, pray that you don't enter into that temptation. You pray about it. You know the weaknesses that you have. You know the things that you get drawn to. Whose job is it to bring a defense against that? Well, of course, you're meant to pray into it. You're meant to say, Jesus, I have difficulty with this. I have difficulty with that. I have difficulty with these things. These are challenges. If you don't bring those to Jesus, then he's not going to be that defense inside you against them. He is there inside you. He is that defense, but if you don't ask him to be it, he can't be it. You understand me? Again, we've got to, it's a cooperation that he wants. He wants us to choose. He wants us to decide. He wants us to say, Lord, I need your help with this temptation. And for these disciples, the temptation was of self-pity. Oftentimes, there's a temptation for us to enter into self-pity, to be sorrowful about the things that we go through. I know I have these moments myself where I just feel, I feel pity for myself. I feel sad that I have to go through these things. I feel sorrowful that I have to walk through these things. And if I dwell on them too much, I know it can just take me down. It takes me down and down and down and down and down until I'm in this place where I'm just going, oh God, what am I doing? But you see, we've got to be able to identify those places that we are tempted. We've got to bring them to him, and we've got to pray into them so that we can overcome those areas of temptation. So just take a moment now and think, in this journey that you're on, in this adventure that you're on, what are the temptations that face you? What are the things that you know you get drawn to, and you get drawn to them really easily? What are those things that could swallow you up if you gave yourself to them? You've got to identify them. You haven't got to run away from them. You haven't to be scared of them. You haven't to fear them. You've got to identify them and bring them before the Lord and begin to pray into them. Pray into that temptation that you might not enter into it. Pray into it. And this is what the guys were doing. Jesus saw that they could easily get into self-pity. You see, they were experiencing huge pressure, huge spiritual pressure. They didn't understand what it was that they were experiencing, but you can imagine that every demon on the face of the earth was towards Jesus and trying to cause him to get in all sorts of problems and difficulties. And of course, the disciples were walking with Jesus. So they were feeling this pressure. They were feeling the weight of the journey that Jesus was walking himself, and they were looking sorrowful, and Jesus could see that, and that's why he said it to them. And then it says, and he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed. Of course, this is what happens. We start praying about things, we start bringing things to Jesus, and it actually appears as though he's miles away. And of course, especially when it comes to us fighting temptation, you see, there's somewhere in us, we've got to kind of break down the power that this thing has over us. We've got to break it. And that's a fight. And when you get into that fight, it maybe feels as though he's a long way away. But actually, he's just a stone's throw away, and he's watching. He's watching your behaviour. He's watching how you're thinking. He's seeing you, observing you all the time to see what reactions, what responses you are going to get into, what the attitude of your heart is, the motivations of your heart. He's watching and observing you carefully. You got to understand, someone's observing you every moment of the day, and that person has got the ability to bring you into whole new spheres. Any time, any moment of this day, he can bring you in a new sphere. He can promote you. He can open another door. He can do something, bring you into a fabulous new sphere, a new opportunity. He can do whatever he wants, and he's watching you every moment of the day. And Jesus says this in verse 42. He says, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. This is a fantastic little verse, and this word nevertheless is a wonderful word. It's one that David used. It says that people came, and he was on the run. He was a fugitive on the run. He had lots of oppression. He had lots of people who were discontent, who were in depression probably, who just were were run on the run with him. But every time he came to a new town, it said, nevertheless, he took the town. He was a nevertheless kind of man. He just went, no matter what, I don't care what the opposition is, I don't care how difficult it's going to be, I don't care about the situation, nevertheless, I'm going to go and do what God said. He was a nevertheless man. Jesus was a nevertheless man. The nevertheless man, if you want. But he says here, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. So, personally, humanly, everything in him didn't want to go where he was going. He didn't want to have to die. He'd gone through enough pain. He'd gone through enough reproach. He'd gone through enough shame. He'd gone through enough difficulties in his short time of ministry. He'd gone through enough. He didn't want to do it. He said, Lord, I don't want to do this. Why would I want to do it? It's painful. It hurts. It does things in my mind. It does things in my heart. It's painful. I don't want to do it. But then he goes, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And this reminded me about the Lord's Prayer, actually. And we can go there. It's in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9 and 10. And it says there, Jesus says this, in this manner therefore pray, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. So, he starts off and he says, when you're praying, you start praying about the Father. He's your Father. He's not a God that's miles and miles and miles and galaxies away. He's your Father who loves you and he wants to know everything about you. So start by saying, Father in heaven. And that's where he is. He's in heaven. We have to recognise that the Father is the Father of all heaven. He's the Father of a different dimension. He's the Father of a kingdom that is full of love, full of joy, full of good things. He experiences this every millisecond of every day. He's the Father of the kingdom of heaven. And heaven wants to enter into your life and into the earth sphere. He says, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. In other words, your name is high. It's the most wonderful name. It's a holy name. Your name is the name above all names. And of course, we know that as the name of Jesus. But he says this, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So he's basically saying, what's going on in heaven, Father? We're asking that it comes to the earth. So there's a transition. Heaven to the earth. But then he says this, your will be done. And it reminded me about what he'd said in Luke 22. He said, not my will, but your will be done. And he says it in this prayer. Your will be done. What's Jesus going through? He's going through this pressing. What's happening with him? Internally he's changing. Internally he's come to this place where all his natural self, all his emotions, all the thoughts that are going, I don't want to go through this, I don't want to do it. All those thoughts and all that emotion, all those natural things are now coming into this place where the will of God is overcoming it. The will of God is pressing it out of his being. So basically he's going, there's all these things screaming, I don't want to die, I don't want to go this road, I don't want to go this path because I'm having to give up more and more of myself and I'm created to be here. I don't want to die, I don't want to give myself up anymore, I'm already doing that. But God is going, no, son, it's my will. And my will has got to overcome your will. And as it overcomes your will, then these things that stop are being pressed out of you. These things are being pressed out. They're being gotten rid of. But at the same time as that, as my will presses out all the natural things that would stop you from doing my will itself begins to flow through you as holy oil. And that's really what was happening in Luke 22. That's why he went to Gethsemane, the place of pressing, because his own natural desires. You see, he didn't have sinful desires, but he had natural desires. All those natural desires, those emotions, the will of God was overcoming them and pressing out from him. And now, holy oil was flowing like never before. This was Jesus at his most pure point, if you want. Just incredible. Let's just read that again. It's Luke 22. And it says there, it says, and this, I love this as well, it says, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. An angel appeared from heaven, strengthening him. So Jesus is giving up his life, and into that moment, an angel comes. Do you want angels around her? And of course, I know that the angels are sent to those who are inheriting salvation, so they're already around you. But do you want an assignment of angels around your life? Because I'll tell you, when you come to those moments where you are going, oh God, I really don't want to give myself up anymore. When you come to that moment and get to that place with the Father and with Jesus are going, Jesus, I'm going to press through. I want to be an overcomer. I'm going to go through this. You know what? I believe that there are angels that come to strengthen you in those kind of prayers. It's at those moments, and I know this, believe me, when you are on your own, you are alone, when maybe you haven't slept for a long time, when you're really beginning to feel, Lord, I cannot do this, at those moments, angels come to strengthen you. And somehow you begin to walk through it. You begin to get through it. And it says, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. So Jesus didn't give up. This is the incredible thing about Jesus. He didn't give up. He prayed more earnestly. He got into it even more, and he's going, Father, I want to overcome. Father, I want to do this. I want to walk this journey that's going to mean more life. What does mean more life? More death. What does mean more life? More giving up. Why? Just to be a martyr? No. So that the will of God, the love of God, the Spirit of God is so in you that he begins to seep through you and flow out to other people. That's what you want, innit? Don't you want to be like Smith Wigglesworth? Don't you want to be like the heroes of faith that you've read about? Well, they were walking this journey. You might not read it in the books that they wrote, but believe me, if there's any man or woman of God that flows in the power of God, that flows in the life of God, they walked this journey. It may not be written somewhere, but I'll tell you what, it's written in the books in heaven, because God's observed these people going through it. So it says when he rose up from the ground, from prayer, and he rose up, he rose up from prayer. When he rose up and came to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. That was the issue for them. They were sorrowful. But then he said, why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation. And then he moved on. He's moving into the journey. So this is what I wanted to share today. More life means more giving up of yourself. Means the will of God coming, all heaven coming to the earth. This is the message today, the adventure of life. Look, have a wonderful evening. Bless you all. We love you and we're with you. God bless.